Okay, welcome back to the Wilton Report. Tonight we have a very special episode of Policy and Properties, and we are live with the mayor of Lawrence Township, and we are going to talk about what's happening in Lawrenceville. But in Lawrenceville, there's a lot of hot button topics. As a matter of fact, I was just talking to the mayor behind the scenes, and I said housing has become the third rail of politics. And tonight we're going to talk about what's happening in Lawrenceville, what's happening behind the scenes, and we're sitting down with the mayor to find out. So again, welcome back to the Wilton Report. I'm Josh Wilton. I co-own and run the #1 boutique real estate company here in central New Jersey. I do work with buyers and sellers every day in this market, and I have seen and see every day firsthand how things like zoning, development, infrastructure directly impact pricing, demand, and long-term value. So by the end of this live stream, you're going to have a better understanding of what's actually happening in Lawrenceville in terms of housing. We're definitely going to be focusing on affordable housing. We're going to be focusing on the development that's being proposed at the state level. And we're going to talk tonight. Joining me is Mayor Bobbitt. So here we go. There we go. Mr. Mayor.
How are you?
Welcome to the Wilton Report. Thank you for coming on and being our guest. I appreciate it. Having interviewed several of your colleagues across the county, I have a keen sense of how busy you guys are, and that
Yeah, it's funny. They told me it was a part-time job. So,
so when I first interviewed Mayor Frieda here in Princeton, like this is probably going back 8 months ago, I said, Mr. Mayor, how many hours do you work for the town? And he's like 40 to 50. I'm like, but you have a full-time job. He goes, that's the problem. So, okay. So I like to start at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
You're not a Jersey guy originally. Is that correct?
No.
So why don't you tell us your background, how you got here? And if you don't mind, I think, because I'm like proud that you're on my show, and I think you should talk about your educational background, how you ended up in Lawrenceville, and then how you ended up in politics.
All right. So Los Angeles native, born and raised, moved up to the Bay Area to go to college at Stanford, got my bachelor's of urban studies there. So sort of looking at everything through a broader lens. Still loved architecture. So I went over across the Bay to our rivals at UC Berkeley.
I read that.
And got my master's at Cal. So, and then moved to San Francisco and lived there for, almost 9 years. So, okay. And started a family there, but so really, really focused on California. And then my wife, she got a job at, she got a sort of internship at ETS, oddly enough. We'll get to that later.
The universe is funny.
Yeah. So we'll talk about funny. Literally the weekend that we found out about the ETS opportunity, there was an article, a real estate article in the New York Times. The Sunday Times we'd get, because let's just say the San Francisco Chronicle wasn't the best paper at that point in the early aughts. And it had an article called Where to Live, Lawrenceville. And it talked about Lawrence Township and Lawrenceville and the diversity of it, both diversity of cultures and economic status. And we thought, that sounds like a really great place coming from San Francisco to move to. So, long story short, found a place in the village.
How long ago was that, Mr. Mayor, that you moved to
2004.
Okay.
2004. So, our daughter wasn't even a year old at that point. So, yeah, it was big, but it was exciting. And so we came out here, fell in love with Lawrence, fell in love with Mercer. My sister lives up in Brooklyn, so that was great. And my brother-in-law lives down DC area, so kind of made the parents sad, but at the same time, the kids were kind of happy to be able to see each other again. Just fell in love with it. So the next year, I jokingly say, we literally drove with our daughter in the car seat up and down every neighborhood that we could afford in Lawrence Township. And we just found a great home in a great neighborhood in Colonial Lakelands and lived here ever since. So
good for you. So now you're in Lawrenceville, your wife's CDTS, you have an amazing background. What on earth made you decide to get into politics, let alone
So,
run for mayor, which by
so
my
it was
account is a tough gig.
yeah, definitely. It was a roundabout way. So one of my mentors in Berkeley, he said, as you progress in life, you should do volunteer work. Get on planning board, get to know your community in an interesting way, right? And so I volunteered and I got on what is now our Business and Economic Growth Committee, but at the time, Growth and Redevelopment Committee. And I started serving in 2005. Got to know a lot of business people in the community. That was helpful for my architecture practice, and just connections and just getting connected to the town itself. And we would have these award ceremonies where we celebrate new businesses and redevelopment and everything. And I got to know the town council. I got to know the town manager. I got to know, and at a certain point, there was a time when, unfortunately, one of our council members passed away, and we needed to fill an unexpired term. And a friend of mine, who's now Commissioner Kathleen Lewis, said, "Hey, low stakes. We need a third person.
You'll be
How about you just
fine.
give
Don't
it a
worry
try?
about it.
It'll be fine."
It's mild, like a hot pepper.
Exactly. Just try it, right? Yeah.
You'll be fine.
Looking
After the
back,
second
you
pepper.
wonder. So, long story short, I decided I really was interested in it. Ran and won. So, and that was back in 2015.
Wow,
So
it's
ever since
amazing.
then, I've
It's
been
an amazing story, right? It really is, and I
yeah.
interviewed Mayor Marathi in West Windsor. Obviously, he's not even a native
Mhm.
of the U.S., and he's been the mayor in West Windsor, and I think it's great, right? So I think it's a great story. So let's talk about, because again, and myself included, right?
Mhm.
Most people, the state and federal government get a lot of play in the news, right? So I would
Yeah.
argue that if we polled the majority of Lawrenceville residents and I said, what type of government do you guys have in Lawrenceville? They go,
Yeah.
what
I
do you
don't know.
mean? Like, we had a mayor. So why don't you explain the type of government?
So what we have is we have a manager council form of government. And what that is very similar to like a independent school or uh, a business where you have a board of directors, that's the council, and then you have someone who's running the day-to-day operations, then that's the township manager. So for us, the manager is talking government branches. He's the executive branch, runs the day-to-day stuff, and we are the legislative body. So the nice thing is that he gets to deal with with all the labor negotiations and all that kinds of stuff, and budgeting, and we get to really focus on policy. So, but the flip side is we are the elected officials, so we are out there and we get the pluses and minuses, right? The
Yeah.
questions from the community, which is
Yeah.
part of municipal government.
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, as part of government, I do wish that there was a higher level of civility involved in it,
It,
but
it's the times.
I
It's the
suppose
time.
so. Yeah, I suppose so. Right. So let's talk. So obviously that's the type of government. So let's kind of pivot towards housing, right? Because
Okay.
obviously every Wednesday I talk policy and property, and I talk about policies that affect homeowners, investors, tenants, landlords, whatever. Obviously, specifically in Mercer County. When I say Mercer County, we've stolen Cranberry, we've stolen Montgomery, kind of stole like
Makes sense.
Lambertville, Plainsboro, South Brunswick. So we kind of stole them. So we cover Mercer County. So obviously, housing is and again, I live, breathe housing, right? But I do think you'd have to live under a rock right now not to be aware of all the development happening in New Jersey. My dad, who's 87 and probably watching this, hi Dad, drove out to Princeton for the first time in a minute, right? And he couldn't believe what he saw on Route 1. Like, he literally was like, this wasn't here. And by the way, he didn't drive. We drove him, but came out, was shocked. So again, it's everywhere. And people's natural reaction in life is to fear change and resist change. It's just our human tendency. So let's talk about Lawrenceville's obligation under the Mount Laurel Statute, But let's talk about that. This isn't something that the town fathers, yourself and the council, just dreamed up. Let's talk about how it's handed down from the state, what your original obligation is, what your current obligation is, and what you're going to do to meet it.
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges is that, for the first two rounds, it was fairly easy for Lawrence Township to. So let me roll back for a sec. With this sort of Mount Laurel doctrine, and which sort of set the framework at the state level for affordable housing, we've had sort of roughly 10-year rounds of, affordable housing that is given from the state that the township has to meet. And so for the first two rounds, it was fairly straightforward. We work with the Council on Affordable Housing, or 𝐂𝐬. I think it's Council on Affordable Housing at the state level, and it was fairly straightforward. And then, the state sort of broke that up, and then it went into sort of a more litigious dialogue, shall we say. And we were actually fortunate.
Litigious would be a word.
I try to be polite. And so we were in the third round, we were actually lucky in a way, in that we were in the vicinage of Judge Jacobson, who is a very thoughtful judge. And even though it was litigation and we sort of had to be in court to get to our number and everything, in dialogue with Fair Share Housing, who's the affordable housing advocate at the state level, Judge Jacobson's ruling for our third round need, her methodology ended up being what the methodology for the fourth round is. So it was a very solid and sound methodology. Our number was, I think, over 1,000 at the time. It was a fairly large number. And so that's
just your
correct. Go ahead. That was sort of the
it was just your affordable housing number.
Yeah, and then what we do is there's called what's a vacant land. It's a vacant land adjustment, where you just say you don't have the space to put that number of houses, and so it gets ratcheted down to another number. And so what we did in the third round was we met it through various developments and rehabilitation and everything else. And so that leads into the fourth round. And so I think the fourth round.
All right, I'm getting nervous just talking about the fourth round. So the fourth round is the dicey round. I think it's the third rail, right? So
yeah,
this is the one fourth round obligation that Lawrence.
This is 320 units. So we have this is the obligation for new construction for the next 10 years. So it's 2025 to 2035. And then there's a whole bunch of numbers that I'm not a planner, I'm an architect. So I'm not very good at going through the numbers and really understanding them in depth like our township planner does. So I've tried to take some cheat sheets and figure out, because there's a lot of formulas that are used to kind of get us to the point where we understand what's needed. So we have what's called a realistic development potential, I think, RDP. And right now that's 56. That's the number. And so our unmet need is 264 units. And so, then we have to create strategies to allow for meeting those goals.
Right. So let's talk about that strategy, because this is where I think people post a lot of questions when I talk about it on social. They say, well, why doesn't Lawrenceville or Princeton or West Windsor just build 100% affordable housing and we don't need 10,000 units? Do you want to answer the question from a fiscal perspective?
So the challenge would be you'd have to find a developer who could pay for that, sort of figure out somehow how to subsidize those units. Now, there are some organizations that are very savvy who can build smaller scale properties, like the one that we're doing on that's occurring on Texas Avenue by RPM. That's 100% affordable, but they go through various state funding mechanisms and other ways that they can make it work. Most organizations, they need that extra 80% of the housing to sort of subsidize the affordable units.
Right.
So
And
that's the
plus,
challenge.
Lawrenceville would be on the hook for 100% of the cost if you
Oh yeah,
built.
if it was a township, then we would be creating a housing authority and having to, bond for that kind of stuff, because you couldn't lay that all out on the property tax levy. That would
And I
plus the
think that's the
2% cap.
disconnect in people's minds. They're like, well, why doesn't Lawrenceville just do it? I'm like, well, who's paying for it? Like, I think they think because it's a state mandate that the state's kicking in money. And I know and I said, no, this falls smack on the municipalities,
Mm-hmm.
So, so 264 units for the fourth round. Is that the obligation?
That's the unmet need.
Unmet need, right.
Yeah. And so go ahead.
No, so let's talk about how we're going to get there.
So what we do is, we run the numbers and we say, listen, we can only realistically provide a certain number based on developable land, right? There are only so many parcels that are available in this township. If you look on a satellite view, you look at tax maps, these are the places that realistically could be developed, right? And so that number ratchets down unless a property owner says, hey, I got 5, I got 10, I got 80 acres that I could add into this mix. And then because the township has an unmet need, it's not as if we can say, oh, no, we can't take your land. And so that's where it gets interesting right now, is that.
Let's talk about the 80-acre site, right? Because that's ironically what's brought you to the East Coast at ETS, right?
Yeah.
And again, I posted on this. I literally don't take sides. I say this is what's happening. I'm not a politician. I'm not a policymaker. I don't work for the state government. I'm not on the courts. This is what's happening. This is it. And I just put it out there, and people get hot. So any insights you can give people as to what might happen at the ETS site? And obviously it's 80 acres and they're talking about a significant chunk of housing there.
Mm-hmm. And so, ETS, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone, has been struggling financially. And so this is an opportunity for them to get a cash infusion, basically, right? To sell off a portion of their property that's underutilized, pretty much. It's not fully defined, but if you imagine the main road that goes through ETS Drive, all the older buildings to sort of the north of that drive, that's the potential, that's the probable site, right? And so one of the things that people are saying, oh, you should just fight them, you should fight this obligation, which
hasn't worked.
Well, what happens is you get. Thank you. You get to builder's remedy.
So let's stop. So just in case somebody's not.
Yeah, I think it's very important for people to know that this is the hammer that is over everyone with this.
Oof, it's a hammer, and you can ask the town of Millburn if you don't believe it. So,
yeah,
builder's remedy. Why don't you explain what that means, not only for the residents, but for I'll say the town fathers, the council, and yourself, in terms of losing your voice in local authority? Why don't you explain what builder's remedy would be in Lawrenceville?
So basically, we are given a number of how many homes, units we need to build. And we try to make a realistic, for various reasons stemming out of the Mount Laurel decision, we try to provide zoning that allows for this to happen. Now, if we try to fight this, we can go to court. That's true. But I have not heard of one single municipality in this state for over 50 years now who has won a builder's remedy case. And what happens when you lose is you lose the ability to guide the zoning on that site. You lose the ability to sort of do setbacks, height limitations, mix of units, those types of things. And instead, the builder gets to decide. And as you can imagine, with, let's just say 20% affordable, and you have this large need that you couldn't otherwise realistically provide for, the builder is going to say, hey, state, I would love to help you with your affordable housing, and I would love to build even more homes on this site.
I'll take care of it for you. Don't worry about it.
Out of the largest out of the goodness of my heart, I'd love to help with this.
Nothing to do with profit. So
No, not at all.
Millburn is an interesting case because they had an agreement. They were going to build affordable housing and redevelopment. And then at the last second, they said no, got sued under builder's remedy. And my understanding in Millburn is the state appointed a special master. And this person is more or less now in charge of planning and zoning for the township of Millburn. And they have no say. And again, I'm not a big into hearsay, but my understanding is this new 100% affordable housing development is going smack in the middle of the downtown. Exactly what they didn't want to do. They wanted to have mixed housing throughout the municipality, and they fought it and they lost. And I look at what's happening in Princeton at the seminary, which again, you'd have to live under a rock not to see what's happening there, right? They actually litigated against the seminary from just redeveloping dorms. Seminary said, fine, we surrender. You guys are better at this than us. They sold the developer and was like trotting along, and he's going to build 263, 283 units. So you wonder, does the litigation really get you anywhere in the end?
Well, it makes the township, maybe $250,000 poorer.
Oof,
but
the money is.
And that's a real challenge when you have a budget of 60 million. That's a lot to put out there just in a losing battle.
Right. So I just want to be clear with everybody. It's not like you thought of this and said, hey, let's just build on ETS. ETS has the property. They want to sell it. Builder wants to buy it. The township is obligated to build housing under the Mount Laurel and the 2024 law. And it's moving along. We're not going to say if it's going to happen or not, but do you know the approximate number of houses that could be built on that site?
So I did pull that up. So let me make sure I got the right number. So it's 80 acres. It's looking at 800 homes total with 115 affordable. So
what would you say? And I both sides of this, right? We are in a housing bloodbath right now. There's just there's no supply for people to buy. Prices are awful. The only way you control pricing, and I was reading an article about Houston, which again is a little bit of a hodgepodge city, has no zoning, and they just build, but they've had the lowest appreciation in the country, right? So I can see the person who lives over by the ETS campus and is like, I didn't sign up for this. I signed up for bucolic country living. What do we say to that person?
That's the hard part. I mean, it really is. I mean, I've been, let's see, we've had three long planning board meetings about various pieces so far. One was 4 hours and the last two were 3. And it's hard because I get it. I mean, I have complete empathy for people who live back there, residents of Lawrence Township, some people I've known for years. And it's a challenge, right? I think of it in this way, right? If you have a tree outside your front window that you've seen for the last 10, 15 years at your home, and it's an ash tree, and the town comes and says, we got to take down your tree because the emerald ash borer, it's going to be a danger, right? You can intellectually understand the reasons behind that tree going, but it hurts because that was your tree outside your front window for the last 15 years. So I have full empathy for residents out there, but at the same time, and so that's why, to try to make lemonade out of this, we would love to keep control over the zoning, the setbacks, the height limitations, the number of units, the mix of units, all those things, so that at least we can make it as innocuous as possible, to keep it away from property lines, to try to preserve green space, to do the best we can with what we have.
And it's such an amazingly tough position you guys are in, and not only the mayors but the council. I mean, it's just in every town. It's tough. There was, I don't know if you saw the video about the Toms River mayor and the town council. They almost came to physical blows.
No.
It was bad. Like they were like overhousing,
Oh,
overhousing, you know?
it's passionate for
Yeah.
sure, for
Yeah.
sure.
So that's the biggest project I'm aware of in Lawrenceville. I know we talked about the secondary project. You want to kind of allude to that one? What might happen on that site?
Yeah, so there's another site. You could think of it. There's an old building there, the Gulick House. It's at the corner of 206 Lawrenceville Road and Province Line. It's right wedged in at the corner. BMS sort of surrounds it. It's about 6+ acres. Um, the houses we just found. The planning board on Monday found that it was an area in need of redevelopment because it met criteria. And so again, as painful as that is, by deeming it an area in need of redevelopment, that allows us to sort of fine tune zoning and all those regulations to try to again make the best of it in terms of massing, setback from the street, sort of screening from trees and things like that. So again, I know people don't want to see it happen. At the same time, it's going to happen because
Yeah.
again, the property owner has tried to put medical facilities there for nearly 30 years now, and the community's fought back. And this is, I hate to say it, a way that you can put a challenging property as a property owner and make some money off of it.
And that, it's, and I am not saying people should not litigate. Everybody has the right to court. But I wonder, like, I always think of here in Princeton, the seminary where they litigated this against the seminary from like building better dorms, and housing for their faculty. And now they're facing down the barrel of a pretty big development. Is it better to, I don't want to say capitulate, but compromise early?
I think you have to pick your battles, right? And you have to understand what's at stake. I would say, we had sort of closed session meetings talking about a much larger number than what could potentially go at that site, and trying to figure out ways that we could sort of, again, this is litigation, so there's negotiating. The judge says, can you two get together and figure out something that makes both of you happy? And so that's what we're trying to do. I think we've gotten to a certain point where we agree that there's a lower number of units, but at the same time, there's still going to be a sizable number of units at the site on 206.
Yeah. And, I did know that had been litigated in the past. I didn't realize for how long. So that's just, again, like.
Oh, I went down a rabbit hole this week. I didn't realize that the property was bought in 1996 by what appears to be Care One, back then. So it's wild.
I knew it was a contentious site. I rather that than that, like, it's just a funny thing. I don't think, you want it to happen judiciously.
Yeah. So
fight it just to fight it. It doesn't seem that will really work out for anybody. So talk to the residents of Lawrenceville. So they're going, you know what? All right, it's going to happen. We're not happy about it, but we want to be more involved in the process.
Oh, completely.
And look, when I say this, I am the guiltiest human being on the planet. We are all armchair generals when it comes to local politics. What can residents in Lawrenceville do to get involved in local governance?
So I would say, starting with like these affordable housing sites, right? One of the things that we've been trying to say at the various planning board meetings is that there's no application yet. There's no developer. Now, people don't believe that, and that's fine. Believe what you want, but there's no developer yet. There's no application before us. So right now, we're really just trying to set the ground rules for these developments. And so that zoning will get in place, because really that's what Mount Laurel and the state is forcing the townships to do. Is Mount Laurel was a zoning issue where Mount Laurel tried to zone out its own residents. It used exclusionary zoning. And so what all this affordable housing from the state is about inclusionary zoning. So that's what the township at this moment is trying to do the inclusionary housing to provide realistic opportunities for housing to be developed.
So
Now,
where do I go as a resident of Lawrenceville to keep track of this? Because I think people think this is a done deal. The builder's been paid. Like, people
oh
go
yeah,
pretty far down the road pretty quickly. So where do I sign up to get actual information from you and your colleagues?
So we have a weekly newsletter called Latest in Lawrence, and there you'll get updates about everything going on in the town. But one of the things that is contained in that email blast is sort of the meetings of the week. And so what you really want to do if you're concerned about these things is to come to council meetings, which are typically the first and third Tuesdays of the month. Summer hours are a little different. And then planning board hearings, which are the first and third Mondays of every month. So pretty easy to figure out. It's on the website, but that's the typical routine. And that's where you're going to hear sort of the conversations, the discussions, the applications for these projects. They will be duly noticed. Anyone living within the legal distance will get a certified mail and all that stuff. But I think just following along to the planning board and watching what's on the agenda is the big thing. Council and the manager at one of our meetings, we heard the public loud and clear at one of our planning board meetings that they felt like we did this behind back, because honestly, the first part of our affordable housing agreement plan was done back in last June, but there wasn't a notice to anyone in particular because it affected the whole township. And so you don't notice, it was a township-wide thing. It wasn't a specific.
Send a certified letter to everybody in town.
Oh my goodness. I don't think we have the budget for that. And so we heard that the community loud and clear. So we're trying to do better about even go above and beyond our legal sort of notifications to kind of alert people to like, hey, this is coming up. But I would say keep an eye on the agendas. And again, when an application comes before the planning board, let's just say on the ETS site or any site, could be affordable housing or anything else. That's the time when the developer will give a presentation, talk about traffic, talk about impacts, all those things, what variances they want, all that nitty gritty. And that's when the public can come and talk about and question, right? You know, I've seen it on small projects. I've seen it on large projects where people say, hey, did you think of, I live next door. I live down the street. I know how things flood. I know what the traffic patterns are because I live here. I live right across the street. So I can tell you your models aren't actually capturing reality. And that's the time to do it.
So we posted in the thread the link to sign up for the newsletter, just so you know.
Oh, wonderful. Great.
So people can check that out. What about what boards or committees can people volunteer for in Lawrenceville? Because again, guilty armchair general, we wait till it happens to us and we're like, God, I can't believe they did this to us. Like it was personal, right? And so what boards or committees or how can people volunteer in Lawrenceville?
So planning board's the main one that will be looking at this. There's planning, there's zoning that also looks at sort of land use issues. And then there's some advisory committees. The environmental Green Advisory Committee is another one that gets all the that gets the applications, and then that committee will sort of review the plans and the applications and make comments. So I think Shade Tree, Trails and Open Space we have are other advisory committees along with the environmental who make comments on applications both to zoning and planning boards. So they can weigh in, even if they're not on the planning board, if they're on, say, the environmental committee, they can say, hey, have you thought about the stormwater? Have you thought about, heat islands? It seems like the impervious is too concentrated or something. Or if you're on Shade Tree, say these trees actually aren't going to perform like you think they are in this environment. So
great. So I will say from a real estate perspective, and I said this about 6-7 months ago. I said, mark my words, Lawrenceville is going to get red hot because the surrounding towns are ridiculous, and Lawrenceville became literally the best deal in town. And about 4 months ago, I did an episode of what you could buy by price point in each town. And you look at Lawrenceville, like, why why am I living in a shoebox in Princeton? I could, have a colonial in Lawrenceville. And it's
Don't get me
interesting.
started. I could do my pitch.
I'm telling you, but from a real estate perspective, I'd say in the last 3 to 4 months, all of it kind of happened the way I thought it would. And Lawrenceville is a scorchingly busy real estate market, very undersupplied.
Yeah.
We're just not building enough houses, right? And you think about it, where Houston just builds. They don't have any kind of rules. They just build, build, build. We have a lot of rules, here. So, part of this equation, and I don't know the sites, if they're going to be apartments or for sale or both, is there a plan to increase the number of homes for sale in Lawrenceville so people can get a peg on that equity ladder?
So I'm not sure right now. I think the ETS site probably provides the best opportunity for that kind of stuff for homes. Most of the sites are a little more constrained. We have some overlays as well. People forget that coming out of the third round and moving into the fourth round, another way you can sort of meet your need is to sort of overlay areas like the Quaker Bridge Mall, some places down in sort of South Lawrence called Harney's Corner, where Princeton Pike and Lawrence Road sort of crisscross each other down by the Brunswick Circle. And those are other opportunities, but those usually typically end up much more dense, more apartment and townhouse based.
Yeah.
But I think for the ETS site, especially, there's a little bit of room there to have the potential of closer to sort of larger townhomes. But again, that's up to the developer right now. We just are at the first bit of setting up that zoning to allow for a mix. So,
right.
But I hear you, because I will do my pitch now. If you look at I nerd out about property taxes and tax levies, and Lawrence Township is consistently just a slightly below the average for Mercer County, definitely below the average for the state of New Jersey, and the services we provide here are second to none. I think if you ever come drive it in Lawrence Township after a snowstorm, you will see blacktop on almost every street.
I've done it, and I know that to be true. I think
we're very proud of that. Very proud of our public works.
Yeah, and it's interesting. My son is a freshman in college, and the Lawrenceville schools, and it's not a knock, it's just a thing. They don't test as high or have the same high scores as some of the other municipalities. And I was at a football dinner with my son, Sean. It was actually in Lawrenceville at a restaurant. And the starting nose tackle for Lawrenceville High School, not the prep, the high school, was going to your alma mater.
Yeah.
Stanford. So, yeah. So these kids are coming out of this high school red hot, well-prepared athletes, student athletes, the whole thing. And, I think there's a lot of opportunity in Lawrence for people to kind of just like you said, wow, why don't we just settle in here? We'll settle in and we'll become the mayor.
Well, I'll say two things on that. First, I'll say we have a really great superintendent of schools, Robin Klim, who's doing an incredible job. And I think she's making an amazing impact on the schools. And then I will say, I've also jokingly said, I did 10 years showing up on the second Tuesday of every month in the basement, leading growth through development. I told people, be careful about showing up on time and regularly to meetings. They might just keep elevating you.
We have another idea for you. We think you should do this. You're like, wait, what? So
yeah. Oh, be on planning board now.
Yeah, well, you're planning board. So hopefully we can see you at the governor level someday. That'd be nice.
Oh boy, that's a lot of work.
It's a crazy amount of work. She just moved back into town, so she's now our neighbor again. So
I think that's incredible. So
I think it's I mean, who wants to commute from Montclair? I always say, look, real estate's all about life and jobs, right? So if you have access to jobs, you're going to move somewhere. She's not driving 2 hours and change each way.
Oh my goodness,
from Montclair. So she moved back down to 206 to Drumthwacket. So
that's
all right,
awesome.
Mr. Mayor. I want to thank you very much for coming on tonight.
Not a problem.
I sincerely appreciate your time. Even more so, I appreciate your expertise. And I think your careful consideration for what you guys are doing for the municipality and the residents of Lawrenceville. It's a lot.
It's a lot. And I know there are going to be people who are going to be upset, but I just keep trying to do my best. And I tell people, hey, this is I said this on Monday. I said it's like we got a chessboard where the game's been half played, and I only have so many moves left I can do. So I'm just doing the best I can with the
And
pieces I have.
that is probably the most apt description I've heard of how towns are dealing with the Mount Laurel mandates.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just you as the mayor and the council don't get to play with all the pieces.
No,
So,
we're not. Despite what some people say, we're not the developer. We don't have a housing authority. We didn't ask for this. We didn't ask for it, and that's. I'll end with that's the challenge of being a vacant land adjust constrained municipality is that all it takes, and our poor planner has been dealing with this. All it takes is someone to say, here's 10 acres, here's 80 acres. And she's got to rerun all the calculations. So
yeah, it's a rough spot. So, all right, Mr. Mayor, thank you. We'll leave it there. I thank you for coming out tonight and listening.
Thank you for having me. This was great. This was really
fun.
So
and again, if you don't mind, every once in a while we'll hit you up if there's news you want to share.
Oh boy,
it's a nice format because, like I said, I don't take sides. It's not that I don't care. I do care, but like, I didn't make the 1975 Mount Laurel law.
you could spend like a month talking about that. So
yeah, I mean, Mayor Marathi, he got hot. Like he was just coming off. He had a fever or flu, whatever, and he was like, he was not happy about it. But it is what it is. So here we are, and we'll
got to deal with it. So
and keep us updated as to how it goes. And I thank you for your time, and I thank everybody for tuning in. And again, my name's Josh Wilton, and this is the Wilton Report. So thanks, everybody.
All right, take care.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.